Support for this podcast comes from Invent Together. I bet you didn't know that inventing activity by Black inventors peaked in 1899, and it has never recovered. Black and Hispanic college graduates patented half the rate of white college graduates. That's just one of the reasons why you need to know about Invent Together. When our patent system gets more diverse, our nation will get stronger and more successful. Find out how you can help diverse inventors and unleash economic opportunity at inventtogether.org.
This episode is brought to you by V8. V8 is the original plant-powered drink, the one that started it all. It has electrolytes and antioxidants, but no added sugar. And at only 30 calories, the 5.5-ounce can is a perfect post-workout replenishment or a satisfying snack. Choose V8 for big plant-powered goodness in one small can.
Welcome to the Bank Shot, a Knicks podcast on WFAN.com. Your host, John Schmelk.
Welcome to the newest edition of the Bank Shot and Knicks podcast. John Schmelk with you. Today, we welcome a new member of the Bank Shot family, PD Webb, talking some NBA draft with us. But first, a reminder, you can find the Bank Shot at WFAN.com and Odyssey.com, and of course, all of your favorite podcast platforms. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe. And if you like what you hear, we'd love it if you left a 5-star positive review. It helps people find this podcast. And also, if you have friends that are Knicks fans or just like the NBA that might enjoy some draft talk, tell them about the podcast as well. It's how we make it bigger and better than ever. Now we're joined by our guest. He is PD Webb, host of the Let's Watch Film show on YouTube. And of course, he is a draft writer. PD, welcome to the show. We have a mutual friend in Spencer Perlman, who's been on this show before. Welcome. Thanks for being with us, man.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to follow in the footsteps of a legend.
Absolutely. And you're already getting ready for what? This would be the 2022 and 2023 draft with where you are right now. Is that right?
Yeah. I just got back from watching 15s, which would be the 2025 and 2026 drafts. So, I'm at EYBL right now. Unfortunately, the hotel has lost some Wi-Fi, so I'm doing this over phone. So I apologize if my audio quality isn't as nice as it usually is. But this world never stops, and you can never look ahead soon enough.
Yes, it sounds great, by the way, and we thank you going the extra mile for us, PD. All right, so let's kind of start here. What's your overall impression of this draft class? How flat is it? Where are the tiers? Are the Knicks in a good spot at 19 and 21 in terms of getting value for their picks? What's your overarching view of this class?
So I would say that this class has 3 big steps. The first one is there's sort of a consensus top 4. Then there's a step where, the evaluation and context is going to be really important. That's probably from about 5 to 20, where, the players are pretty similar in quality. It's just about, what the circumstance you have to actualize, their outcomes. If you, believe in shooting development, you probably have a different order. If you have a situation where you need playmakers, you most definitely have a different order. And then there's this tier from about 20 to 21 to 45. That's basically every forward you could ever want. This draft is positionally skewed. So there's not a lot of playmakers, which is really specific to the Knicks, of course. But like point guards, like true point guards, not a lot of. There's a ton of combo guards and a ton of like forwards, especially from different stripes. If you want a guy who can handle a little bit more, a guy who can shoot, those are here in spades. So it's a draft that I think caters towards teams that are already good. And teams that have a developmental staff in place. The Knicks, for the first time in my life, meet both those categories, and that makes it an extremely exciting draft to be a part of for them.
Absolutely. So, to your point, the only true playmaker and potential engine of the offense that's probably going to be there when the Knicks pick, and, he might not be, but it could be in the range at least, is Sharif Cooper. Is he a guy that you think, because of the nature of the class, might get pushed up the board just because of position scarcity?
I think that's certainly a possibility. I mean, it's also important to note that he measured at a taller than 6 feet at the combine, which it appears to be real. The concern was that he was probably closer to 5'10" and a half. without shoes, and it seems like he's basically 6 feet without shoes, which is huge for him. I
Strong
think
kid
that
too, right? Like, I mean,
yeah,
he can handle himself, right? He isn't like Trey Young slim either.
no, I mean the best way I can put it is that he had a 55% foul rate. So 55% of his shots were free throw attempts, playing at probably like 175 pounds in the SEC. So he got to the rim that much and was able to get fouled that much. Usually skinnier guys have really small foul rates, and him being skinnier, like, no, he's not super slim, but on the skinny side for SEC point guards especially, he was living at the rim, and that's the things that are special about him is that he can get 2 feet in the paint at will, and he's probably the best passer in the class, which is a very alluring intersection, regardless of scarcity of the position in this class in particular.
What's your level of concern with the shot? I watch it. They say in his workouts now he's not leaning back. My answer to that is, yeah, of course he's not leaning back. There's not a 6'3" guy with a hand in his face. He doesn't have to lean back to get a shot off. But the thing that worries me more than that, though, is I think that can get fixed. It seems to be a shot that takes a while to get off, and he kind of loads it up. It's not a quick release. And if you're going to force guys, and he's going to be a pick and roll player, right, to go over those screens, you kind of have to have a bit of a quick release off the dribble so guys don't go under, right? So how do you kind of bring all that together into a nice little package when you decide when he should go off the board?
I mean, I think it comes down to having a pretty frank conversation with your player development staff, saying, what is it specifically about jumpers we think we can fix? I mean, balance is pretty fixable. He has, I would say, aside from the balance issues on his jumper, he's he's a very good athlete. He maybe has the quickest hands in the class, great coordination, great proprioception. So I think for me, I generally believe shooting on the catch is the easiest skill to develop. He's always going to be a ball in hand point guard, just because that's what he's always been, since I first saw him in 8th grade or something. I think that the worry about it being slow developing is more important than the mechanics of it, because he's going to make shots eventually. It's just a matter of whether it's in year 1, year 3, year 5. And then figuring out the volume that's best for him. The difference between him and I think a lot of other guards with shooting challenges is that he's so fast that going under is also going to be a problem, because he's going to win the foot race. And if he wins the foot race, he's going to get fouled. And if you rotate him big over, he'll find the pass. So I think that it's less about the percentages for me. It's more about deciding how you want his 3-pointers to come from. Are you going to have him play a little bit of off ball more, where he's probably less comfortable, to give him a better shot quality? Or are you going to say, hey, we're going to let you rep this out live, shoot off the dribble, take side steps, take step backs? And I think that most teams will probably go route 2, but I think for the Knicks specifically, there is a pathway for them to go route 1, because they have enough players who have some primary equity, or can handle the ball a lot in most matchups, like Julius, and quickly is going to get to secondary usage in the next year or so.
And even Barrett too, right? I mean, Barrett can take some of that on his shoulders.
Yeah. 100%. So I think that there's pathways for the Knicks to probably get extra value from his catch and shoot ability, and that catch and shoot development on his first contract. And I mean, I can't speak highly enough of the development staff the Knicks put together. It's an all-star group, to put it lightly. And I think I don't know where you land on Tibbs's reputation versus the experience of Tibbs. I always say that Tibbs doesn't hate rookies. He just hates guys that don't know what they are yet. And he kept Nate Robb in the league forever. He loved Eddie House. It's guys who can do a thing. And when you look at Sharif, yeah, he's going to be young, but the thing he's going to do at an NBA plus level is get 2 feet in the paint. And it's hard to look at this Knicks roster, and especially how the playoff series ended, and say that's not a thing that won't be immediately valued, regardless of whether he's a teenager or not.
No, I agree. And I was never a Kevin Knox guy, coming out, but I do wonder where Knox and Ntilikina would be today if they had this player developmental staff they have now from when they were drafted. I really think those guys were short shrifted the first couple of years they were a part of the franchise. I really do.
Yeah. I mean, when we think about, players, busting or failing to reach potential or having stalled developments, so many times it's because they fall into a draft slot for a team that isn't really fertile soil, and it doesn't matter really about them. They're put into a place where almost no one would have succeeded. And the more that a player needs a good developmental staff, it seems that like if you get put into a bad one, things can go really sideways.
Well, let me ask you, because you brought it up, what is it about the Knicks developmental staff and the way they're going about things that make you so optimistic that the guys they do pick, they can turn into players at some point?
I mean, first thing you have to start with is Tibbs is extremely clear with what he wants out of players. You can even see this in how like Frank responded to like overly gunning at times, because they were like, "Hey, if you turn down shots, we will not play you." So starting with first having like an open line of communication about what's expected with so many young guys, you just don't get that. They're expected to kind of do a little bit of everything, and that can be overwhelming for younger players as they figure out the order of operations and what exactly is being asked of them. And then since we're talking about guards, like Johnny Bryant has a track record that is pretty unparalleled for a guy his age. Gets buy-in really quickly and seems to tailor his teachings to the specific body and specific play style of players. You'll find some player development guys who do the same thing, for everybody. Like they teach like broad fundamentals, and it feels like Johnny really does a good job of adapting what he does to fit the style of guy, and that's something that really allows for adaption and adding new things to a specific type of player instead of trying to make everybody fit a mold.
All right, so let's close the book on Cooper. Is your sense that the Knicks, if they really do want him, that they're probably going to have to move up, or do you think they can sit and pick and risk it at 19?
I think that they're going to move up. I don't know if they have to, because I believe that this draft order will not be the order that players are picked, just because there's too many double picks. There's too many, young players who are, unhappy across the NBA, and too much sort of too much of an idea that there are wins to be had if you could, assemble a super team. So teams are going to really be shuffling the deck, and adding double picks to that mix sort of makes that impetus even stronger. So I think teams are going to trade up to find their guy, and not just the Knicks. I think multiple people are going to, and that's going to make teams like the Knicks, who have a guy who basically does the exact thing the roster needs. I mean, if you don't have somebody you're absolutely in love with, or you're not assured that you'll get them, like, you need to just go up and do it. History has generally smiled well upon teams that trade up for somebody that fits specific needs, and being able to build the developmental environment for them.
Yeah, if you look at Walt Perrin's history with Utah too, right? I mean, that's littered with move ups for guys that they like that generally hit.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also that, like, from a front office perspective, it's just smart to go all in for stuff like this, because nobody ever really gets fired for like making mistakes in the second half of the first round or afterwards. You generally like lose your job if you whip on like number 5 or number 7 or whatever.
Sure.
But if that's just an extra asset, like go take a swing, like go move up to find somebody you really believe in, because the cost of not doing so is so low. Like 21 most often, like as much as, like, I mean, I'm a draft person, I spend 365 days a year here, but like looking mathematically, the pick in the 20s is very rarely a star. Like in almost every draft, you'll get like a guy who, if he turns out to be a good rotation player in the 20s, that's a successful pick. And you're just much more mathematically assured to get an impact player higher up. So, it's one of those like 4 quarters doesn't make a dollar situations. And if you believe you have a dollar, like go cash it in, because that is the best possible thing you can do for your franchise is get a talent that can connect the talents that you have.
Oh yeah, I mean, and just look at the league. It's a star league. You can go
Mhm.
find the sixth or seventh or eighth guy in your rotation, even the fifth guy in your rotation in free agency, pretty much any year if you have cap space, right? You can go and you can do that.
Yeah.
But if you think that you have a chance at a difference maker, to your point, that's much more valuable than two helpers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's also that it's easier to find those helpers once you're good.
Right.
Like doing the reverse is much harder from an organizational standpoint because the helpers don't inform what sort of star you need, but what sort of star you have informs how to get like extra value from those helpers. So if you have a star who can really pass, then you don't need to find passers; you need to find shooters. And you going from that operating principle, which like I think the Knicks kind of already have in getting Randall, in having RJ. You have like a specific type of player who has strengths and weaknesses. So now you can get extreme value from players who may have flaws. Like, I mean, Cooper is a one-way player for the most part. Like, I think Cooper is the clearest pick in the draft in terms of matching a team to a player's strengths and weaknesses outside of Cade. Because like, if you build a fantastic defense, now you're allowed to take swings on one-way guys who could do really special things because you have the ability to cover up for their demerits on the other side of the floor.
Should the Knicks be nervous about packaging 19 and 21 to move up? Or are they going to be able to get a similar player at 32? Or maybe, who knows, maybe move up a few spots from 32 by trading a future number 2. The Knicks have 1 million second-round picks coming up.
Yeah.
To move back into that back end of the first round. Is there a big drop-off from like 21 to 32 in your minds?
No, there's almost it goes until 45. You'll have players like BJ Boston who, are really interesting long-term upside bets. And I'm not just saying this because he went to Kentucky, but BJ is a former RSCI top 5 guy in the country who
Sure.
had a very up and down year. The percentages, started the year low from 3 and really strong from 2, and then flipped at the end of the season where he was really, really strong from 3, but struggled at the rim. You have a guy who needs strength and needs core development, needs flexibility work, needs a long-term, vision towards his offensive theory. Like, there is a shot creator and a player who can have a unique blend of space creation and handle at 6'7" with a big wingspan. It's just finding a team that has that patience, and that's going to be available, at probably between 25 and 45. Probably maybe even later if teams don't have faith in their strength conditioning program. You have players like Kessler Edwards, who is a truly special shooter in my mind, who has some movement skill problems in his left hip that could unlock the ability to shoot off movement in both directions, versus right now he shoots mostly moving towards his right. That's a player that could be available anywhere from 20 to 35. Like, there are players that, I mean, both these guys are 3.5s or sort of combo forwards. And there's going to be a lot of guys that will drop because teams don't have either the infrastructure or the particular roster needed to maximize. And so I think this is going to be one of those drafts where if a guy starts to fall and they get to 34 and BJ Boston's on the board, and you believe that you have a fantastic strength and conditioning guy, similar to what like Milwaukee had or what Denver has, you trade up. You're like, oh yeah, we can solve that problem. That's what this draft is going to be, matching player development and player evaluation to the type of swing you'd like to take, because there are swings to be had up until about like 45, 47.
What are the swings that you think would be the highest percentage swings if you have that type of staff and development program that you're talking about?
I mean, I think that you just want to go big on shooters. Teams, like, I think that a world where you can surround Barrett and if you have an advantage creator and you have these like 2 really big wings that can punish basically everyone who's not Braun from a strength perspective, Braun and like if you have those guys, what you need to do is make sure that help side is not in a good position. So you load up the weak side with shooters. And so, finding, whether it's Kessler Edwards or Sam Hauser, the idea that you can, find the best shooter possible and run, as many actions for them as your offense will allow. And that will, create a synergistic effect where suddenly that help side, which we saw in the Atlanta series, is a half step outside the paint instead of having 1.5 feet in the paint. And that's going to make the world of a difference for, a guy like Barrett, who's so reliant on certain angles to finish. Those are like the team-based upside. It's not going to sound super sexy to say like, yeah, draft the 23-year-old shooter, but that 23-year-old shooter is an upside bet on the theory of the team you've built and how, that spacing interplay will work for, RJ Barrett attacking, on a second side pick and roll.
Oh no, PD, I'm with you. Like, it drove me nuts. Like the year the Knicks drafted Kevin Knox, like, oh well, look at all his upside. A guy like Michael Bridges, he doesn't have any upside. I'm like, guys, just because he's like a certain type of player doesn't mean that he's not going to become better. Just those sorts of blanket statements just kind of drive me nuts.
Yeah,
with you.
Upside is one of those things that I find to be really funny because, like, I mean, like, it means different stuff to different people, and for some people, upside means like, will they do an East Bay in game? And like, that's the definition of upside. But like, isn't another definition of upside is like, we will win more games. Our team has more upside. And I think embracing that definition when you're an already good team, it's the difference between, having a team that can answer, Atlanta goes on a 9-0 run. You call timeout, you make a couple subs. The ability to bounce back from that is an upside. It's just not how we think of it, because when we think of upside, we think of a guy who does cool dunks or, just does a lot of really fun things. But, team upside is a form of upside and one that looks a lot different. Like Cal Bridges has a ton of upside. Look how essential he was to the Phoenix run. Did it look really cool? Not particularly. Like, he has his moments, but it's generally him just doing things that make a team better and divorcing that from the aesthetic biases that come with, the general guys that we call upside. Because there's a ton of bad players who can do some really cool stuff.
This episode is brought to you by Exxon and Mobil's Synergy Supreme Plus. Snacks, smartphone, kids, and dog. Got them all. You're packed and ready for your first road trip in a very long time. But wait, now you gotta fill the car. So why not check out the Exxon or Mobil station down the street, where you can fill up with their best fuel ever, Synergy Supreme Plus. It's premium fuel that keeps your engine 2 times cleaner for better gas mileage. And that's a whole lot cleaner than your back seat will be after a trip with 2 kids and a dog. Go Synergy Supreme Plus. It's premium. It's supremium. Fill up today at your closest Exxon or Mobil station. Synergy Supreme Plus gas compared to Synergy regular gas in port fuel injected engines. Benefits based on continuous use and may vary. Go to Exxon.com for details.
Yeah, we watched Nick Young play in the NBA for a long time. The Knicks could be in a position here, PD, where they can select one of a couple different combo guards where they're not quite a point guard, not quite a shooting guard. And I'll throw these guys kind of in that basket. I know they're different in different ways, but the Jaden Springers, the Trey Mans, the Jared Butlers, guys like that. What are the important characteristics you're looking for from guys that are kind of tweeners between your traditional point guard and your traditional shooting guard or wing that you think lends towards long-term success in the NBA?
I would say that having a singular skill is what makes, because for a lot of tweeners, it's about finding lineups that make sense for them.
Sure.
So like Bones Highland is sort of like a player that's very similar to Emmanuel Quickley.
Yep.
He does a thing. That's that he can shoot with ultimate versatility. He'll take, double step backs. He can shoot off movement. He has catch and shoot range to like the college logos, which of course are humongous, but you get what I'm saying.
Yes.
And then like a player like Jaden Springer, is like a traditional high upside play where he's really young. He does like extremely cool defensive things. He loves a 2-handed dig. You can throw him on 1s, 2s, and 3s because he has the strength to deal with it. But you need to put him in a situation where you can maximize that and not like ask him to dribble. And are willing to slow play his shooting development because he struggles to take them at a real volume right now. So I would say if you are a combo guard, the most important thing is getting them onto an NBA floor in a positive developmental sense, which usually involves doing a thing well, because not that many people are taking combo guards in the lottery where you just play no matter what. Yeah, so
You have a guy
finding
out
what,
there you can trust him to make an open three. You can trust him to defend a good player on the other team. A role that you know that they can succeed at is basically what you're saying.
yeah. I mean, the difference between scouts and coaches is that scouts see what a player could do, and coaches see what they can do right now. And the most common question you get from coaches is like, why am I putting him on the floor? And the answer, and for combo guards or tweeners, there has to be an answer, because a little bit of everything is really hard to get on the floor. Because I mean, if they can do one thing really well and a couple of things good, that's a very winning player, and one coaches always play. But a little bit of everything is a bit of a headache, because how do you build the other four around that?
All right, so here's a good follow-up question. When I've asked people that analyze draft prospects for a living, the thing they tell me about Jared Butler is try to find the negative with him for me. He can do everything pretty well. So how would you look at a guy like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that he can do everything pretty well. The shooting is kind of the thing that you would hang your hat on. It's like,
Okay.
He's going to shoot with some versatility. And that he brings a level of defensive activity. So like, those are the two things he's going to do well and get him on the floor. He's a well-rounded player, and I'm really excited that he's, medically eligible. So that's been a concern for him for a minute, and just getting him through that process makes me so excited to know that he gets to live his dream. I think Butler is probably, like, I don't want to say consolation prize, but fits a lot of the same concerns. I don't think he has the same ability to get to the 2 feet in the paint always like Sharif does. Like, he's probably one of the 5 best in the class, though his handle is just so much fun to watch. That man's spin move it's a work of art. But I think that he would solve the Knicks' problems, but just not to the same degree that somebody like Sharif would.
How do you evaluate a guy like Cameron Thomas, who, maybe excluding Cade Cunningham, if you need a bucket in this draft and you just want to give a guy the ball, he might be the guy you take. But that's not everything. And there are so many things that he struggles at. So as a scout that is going to bring somebody in, and to your point, try to convince a coach to play him where, he can score, but can you trust him in other ways that would drive a coach nuts? How do you view trying to develop, I hate to say, more, less on court, physical skills and more, mental skills, feel for the game type stuff for a guy like Cameron Thomas?
I mean, I think that the way that you would say is that there is a floor on what Cam Thomas will do. Like, a thing that happens a lot is that, guys who are kind of good at everything, your Xavier Tillmans, your Brandon Clarks, they kind of, like, there's not a way to minimize their role. They're either going to do what they do and they'll be in the NBA for a long time, or they just won't meet certain scoring thresholds and they kind of wash out, or, they flip between the G League and the NBA and never quite secure a spot. If Cam Thomas never adds the passing, he will always be valuable to teams, at the very least coming off the bench, playing 15 to 20 minutes a game and putting the ball in the hole. That's
right.
Always going to have value. It's just finding a situation where that matters more. Like, I think the passing rates are fine. The defense is a concern, but there is a guaranteed floor that he will have value, because teams are always going to need scoring punch on second units. And if he can tone down, if the shot selection gets toned down where he doesn't have to take everything, because, like, I don't think that he's, he's scoring for a purpose. It's not just like, out here doing whatever, but because he had to carry such a huge usage burden, there's only a certain amount of great shots that are available, and you just have to start taking, the best you can get. And for some of the static sets that LSU ran, he was, forced to kind of make something out of nothing, and something out of nothing kills your percentages. In the NBA, facing second units, maybe facing, second or third defenders on the floor, like, he's going to be able to get those buckets. It's just a matter of recommending him to a place where those buckets matter more, because if you put him in, on a bad team or on a team that has a bunch of scoring, I don't think it's particularly valuable. But if you put him on a team like, if you put him next to a Cade, where, like, Cade comes out and you just need somebody to give a little extra boost, like, yeah, that's something he will do and will produce winning basketball.
How tough can it be to change somebody's mental approach like that and to pull them back to fix something like shot selection? It isn't like changing the physical form of a jump shot, right? I feel like it's something a lot more subtle than that. Is that just determining whether or not the player is willing to listen, grow, and adjust? And you get that from your scouts and, what they know about the kid and the coaches that have been with him. How do you judge how easy it is to change that part of somebody's game?
Yeah, wiring is a difficult thing. I mean, partially it's info, partially it's, nobody at 18, 19, 20 is a fully formed version of themselves. And oftentimes the adults in the room can get carried away making too many inferences about a kid.
Right.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of, money and jobs on the line, but at the end of the day, like this is a person who is developing. And so I'll say that what you generally try to do is imagine like best and worst case scenarios for like what they could be placed in. So, what happens if this player is like thrown into the deep end where they have to deal with, a whole bunch of failure. Some players have never really lost before. I mean, when do you think the last time that Cade Cunningham was like on a losing team was? 7th grade?
Yeah, maybe.
6th grade? Like, you have to ask, like, what does it look like if you guys can't win games? Then you're reading body language. You're asking people how it went after losses. Some people, really can struggle with being asked to do things that they're not good with new experiences. So it's, hey, how do you handle learning new things? If we try new stuff, maybe you go to a workout and you say, hey, we want you to play this 3-on-3 game versus, fringe NBA players. All you can shoot with is your left. I think that it's mostly trial and error and trying to put people in. You get a little bit of info and you kind of test it out against the person just to get test it out against the people they know, their agent and stuff. But for the most part, it's a little more guesswork than I think everybody would like to admit. That you kind of have some insights just based on what has worked well before, but you don't really know how a guy's going to react if you say, hey, we're bringing you off the bench. Some people love the challenge of coming in and trying to change a game by themselves. Other people are frustrated when they don't get introduced in warm-ups.
We talk about the Knicks needing playmakers, and I'll transfer to the wings here in a second, but there's one other guy that we haven't talked about much on this podcast over the past couple of weeks is Josh Giddey out of Australia. And a lot of people talk about, he has great size at 6'8", and that's true. He's a great guy that can pass with court vision, and that's all true. But how much do you think his lack of elite athleticism to break people down limit the positive impact of his passing and playmaking, or does his size and be able to pass over the top and things of that nature, help add the utility to that skill, basically helping a team win?
So I would say that I was on the position that he wasn't going to be able to get separation and wasn't able to reach passing windows to even throw passes. Like, I think that
that's my point. Exactly right.
That he couldn't get there. And I really when I saw him at Basketball Without Borders, I very much felt that he was struggling to get by basically everybody and had to craft his way into what he got. He, I think, hit the weight room for the first time in his life, for real, and put on 20 pounds and put on a reasonable amount of athleticism. I don't think he's going to turn into prime J.R. Smith in terms of burst and last step. But I think that there is athleticism yet to be gained because his body is still very much adjusting to a real strength and conditioning program. His size is a huge bonus. It's also the fact that he's probably not going to be expected to be a primary, where he's breaking down a defense from a high pick and roll every possession, because he has developed as a shooter to a pretty good degree, compared to where he was, a year and a half ago. There's a good chance that you can have him as a second side guy because his jumper will keep defenses honest. And that's a huge difference when the scheme of the offense can create a little bit of an edge that he's playing the angles of versus him having to create that defensive rotation and then taking advantage from it from like a 1-4 flat perspective.
This episode is brought to you by Comcast. In the last 10 years, Comcast's Internet Essentials program has connected more than 10 million Americans to low-cost broadband internet at home. Now, Comcast is committing $1 billion over the next 10 years to reach 50 million low-income Americans with the tools and resources they need to succeed in a digital world. Learn more at comcast.com/education.
All right, let's head to the wings here. I think the phrase that I hear the most when people are talking about draft prospects the last few years, oh, this guy's a 3-and-D player. And they just throw it out there like it encompasses, like half the draft class. Oh, he's a 3-and-D guy. He's a wing. He's fine, whatever. How do you differentiate between those guys? And I can bring in a bunch of the guys in this class into this conversation that people tend to throw into that group. To some extent, Franz Wagner, Trey Murphy, Moses Moody, to an extent, I guess, Corey Kispert, Duarte. As a scout, how do you separate those guys? You could talk about the prospect specifically if you like. You can just talk more generally if you prefer to do it that way. But how do you just separate them than just saying, oh, 3-and-D, you know what you're getting?
So I would say that 3-and-D is a good idea, but in practice, there's not that many guys who are just 3-and-D. Like, I think that like Robert Covington sort of spoiled a lot of people for like because he shot threes and he played defense. Most teams also can't like accommodate that sort of player. Like their offenses aren't built for a guy who basically is a play finisher. They're is the same thing as it like is to shooting what Dwight Howard is to lob finishing. Or like if he gets the ball, one thing is going to happen. For the most part, you're thinking of these players as sort of on a spectrum of allocating between dribble, passing, and shooting. So can they attack a closeout? If they attack a closeout, do they go all the way to the rim? Or do they prefer to drive and kick? Can they run a little bit of a pick and roll? Can they run a pick and roll every 5 positions, every 10 positions? Like if they dribble, is that a win for the defense? To me, that's an easier way of thinking about things is trying to imagine they're better, like how much you want them to pass and how much you want them to dribble. And then you could, with shooting, I think that people generally think of like a shooter is a shooter is a shooter. And this draft has really brought that point home because like there's, I would say 3, 4, 5 guys who have an argument for being the best shooter in the class. It just depends on how much versatility you want from them and whether you want them to do mostly catch and shoot, to come off a little bit of movement, to come off a lot of movement. You want them to shoot off the dribble. Do you want them to shoot off dribble moves? And depending on how you weight the values of each parts of shooting, you're going to have a different answer. If you want a guy who can kind of do all of them, like Bones Highland might be the best shooter in the draft because he does shoot all that way. If you're thinking of it from a pure catch and shoot perspective, you might think Trey Murphy or Corey Kispert. If you want a guy who can shoot off like extreme movement, like the JJ Redick, like sprinting backwards kind of stuff, like you might lean Sam Hauser. And I think that if you're a team who does need extreme movement, like you're only considering Sam Hauser. So I think that when people say 3-and-D, they're sort of thinking of an offense that doesn't really exist now that Houston has been disbanded, which is where like a guy just stands in the corner or stands above the break with his hand up and waits for James Harden to solve defense. If you're not in that situation, like you got to do more than just 3-and-D. So for me, it's kind of easier because that situation is gone. So now everybody else has to make a decision on how they're thinking about passing, how they're thinking about attacking off those closeouts, and how they're thinking about how much offense you want these players to play, or how much offensive decision making do you want these players to have. Sorry, it's been a long day. So like players like Duarte have a little bit more juice off the dribble. Kispert is I would say an incisive passer, and so you're matching the wing to your offensive approach, and also to the way that your lineup is constructed. Some people do not have creation possessions to just hand out. Like you can't, if a wing were drafted in Atlanta, like you're just not getting playmaking possessions away from Trey and Herder Reddish and Hunter, like there's not a playmaking window there. So, their preference for wings is going to lean more towards, ball movers and shooters versus guys who have an expectation of a playmaking.
The Knicks might be in the mix for a big in this draft, PD. Do you like the class? Is somebody worth the bang for the buck at 19 or 21, or you think it's more likely that's something the Knicks can do with one of their 2 second-round picks at 32 and 58?
I like the bigs. I just don't know if any of them provides a complement to what the Knicks are looking for. I think that the big who would be the most interesting and probably would be the most Tibbsy big would be Usman Garuba.
Yeah.
Who might be a 5, who might be a 3, depending on who you talk to. I lean more towards him being a wing because of his movement skills and his, his ability to guard up. But he's also not the sort of, you would basically have a person who's built like Julius Randle. Obviously not the same offensive player, but just the same frame. And I think there is a bit of diminishing returns, but it would basically give, Tibbs a replacement for Taj Gibson. Because he talks like Taj Gibson. He might be one of the most advanced communicators I've seen for a teenager ever.
Wow.
His defensive tape is if you were somehow to give him the appearance of being 36, it wouldn't surprise you, just because every rotation is angle perfect, and you can see that he's been playing professional basketball from a really young age with how he processes the game defensively. In a class with Scotty Barnes and Evan Mobley, who are both just extremely good scheme defenders, Garuba might be the best of them, because I've seen him do it against pro teams, and it's really enjoyable to watch. I just don't know if I think if you gave Tibbs carte blanche, that would probably what he would do, because he just watch Garuba chain together 4 or 5 defensive actions and be like, yeah, we're doing this. I don't you guys want me to play young guys? I'll play him. Did you see that ice forward was perfect? Yeah, I'll play him all the time. What do you want? You can get him a compression shirt, tell people he's Taj. I think that if you're looking for a big, you're probably, obviously Mitchell Robinson is a decision that the team's going to have to come to, on what that pathway looks like going forward. But you'd probably want a 5 who can shoot, and most of those 5s who can shoot are later interesting bets than they would be at 19 or 21.
All right, I just want to jump back to the wings because I think you made a great point. Fit with RJ Barrett and Julius Randle, and obviously a huge unknown at point guard at this point. What guy do you think of this wing class that they could be had at 19 or 21 you think would fit well between Barrett and Randle, especially if a guy like, Reggie Bullock happens to leave in free agency?
It might be a little bit too early for some people, but I think Joel Ayayi makes a lot of sense as a very good shooter who can move and cuts really well. He's kind of between 1 and 2 size. He's about 6'5", long, but not insanely long arms. But just a guy who has clearly come from. He went to Gonzaga, was part of that fantastic Gonzaga team that did the national championship, and he's probably the best cutter in the class. Just has the ability to just vanish when the second that help side looks away, which is going to be important for a team that has 2 on-ball bullies that are going to be on the floor. Had a 3-point attempt rate above 35, shoots with good versatility. He's not going to have a ton of on-ball juice, but was a hell of a spacer for Gonzaga and shot almost 39% from 3 in college. He's also used to having a smaller usage, so you can kind of use him as a lineup connector, a guy who makes good decisions, who will take and be respected from 3 and is a good cutter. And if you believe that this roster is mostly done, which I kind of do, it is very cohesive and just needs a little bit of tinkering, this would be a way of getting a player who had a 66% true shooting, just doesn't take bad shots and fits into a larger team construct really well, while having, I would say, good athleticism and just rebounds the ball, which is always great to have from your guards.
Support for this podcast comes from CDW and Acer. At CDW, we get to be productive. It helps to avoid
interruptions. Oh, I hate those. Oh, please continue.
Well, with an Acer Chromebook Enterprise device, you
Great machines.
Yes, and they're even better when they're pre-configured by CDW experts to support uninterrupted productivity wherever your workforce goes with
4G LTE? Nice.
and a battery that lasts
14 hours. Yep, great. Oh, sorry, you were saying?
IT orchestration by CDW.
People who get it.
Find out more at cdw.com/Acer.
All right. Anything about this class? I'll just open the floor to you that you think we've missed, that you think is worth talking about. Anything that you've been thinking about a lot in terms of thinking about these players differently after watching the finals, what works in the NBA, what teams need to focus on. I will literally leave the floor open to you. I'm sure you've been talking to a lot of basketball people down there talking about this sort of stuff. Anything that's just kind of on your mind and relating to this draft class specifically, or just scouting in terms of getting guys that can help you win in the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, a thing that I've been talking about the last like 6 months or so is the idea of drafting players a year before they're ready. There are like Josh Primo is a good example. Like Josh Primo blew up in the interview circuit because apparently he's the most charming individual just in the world. And I mean that's a direct quote. Just like people fall in love when they talk to Josh Primo. It's fueled his rise. I mean, he's one of the youngest guys in the class, but it sounds like he's running for state senate with some of the quotes you hear from NBA teams leaving interviews with him. So like Primo kind of left a year before his stats would say he suggested he should. And what NBA teams are seeing is like, oh yeah, this is a really young guy. We'll develop him. He's probably like, we would rather have the year of control, the year of determining what he works on, how to shape his body, than him going back to college, playing well, confirming he's a first rounder. And then like, we can't draft him because we picked him at 21. If he went back to school, he might go top 15. And that doesn't help us. He's, playing for the Phoenix Suns or whatever now. So thinking of players who like, if they had gone back to school, like obviously we're past the deadline, there are players who I thought, like Rocco Precaution, he left this draft, broke my heart because I would have, I thought he was a top 10 player in this draft. So like thinking of guys who, if they did go back, would have risen. So like Zaire Williams, a player who had injuries. Stanford lived out of a hotel for most of the year, had personal setbacks, kind of struggled to be more than a tough shot maker, and kind of rose and fell with his ability to hit step backs and the ability to finish with like little floaters. And thinking like if he had gone back for a year, if he had worked on his body, had gotten stronger, he'd added a little bit more explosiveness, he's probably going top 10 next year, potentially even top 5 if the shooter that he's been in at youth levels comes through. So instead of letting him fall to 15, 20, 25, maybe gambling on your player development staff, your longest view in the room idea of Zaire Williams, and saying like, we don't need anything from this year. Let's put him in the G League. And, let's get everything we can out of his diet. Let's get everything out of his weight room, and basically, treat him like buried treasure. And in 2 years, we're going to get a better version of him because we slow played him. And because this is a draft for me that is about fit, but not just about rookie year fit, but long-term fit, drafting players that you believe you have an organizational insight to and can get added value from trying to target the best version of them in 5 years, rather than I think what the NBA does sometimes is short term, be like, oh yeah, this guy's 24, we're on a short term timeline with the team we have, let's draft him and play immediately. And that works for some circumstances, but it's not a guaranteed pathway to getting the most value out of the draft. And
I imagine Keon Johnson will probably be another guy that can be in that category, right? Yeah,
I mean, both Tennessee guys, Jaden and Keon, both fit that category. Dacian Nix could certainly fit that category. This is a draft that very much, like we talked about Kessler, Primo certainly, Isaiah Todd especially, as an intersection of a big who can shoot, who just needs probably a more strength and a flexibility routine. Like there are guys where there is extra value if you are willing to invest it, if you're willing to slow play it and work on crafting a specific environment. So, I mean, I think to me, that's what this draft is going to be about once you get past the lottery. And I'm really excited to see how it plays out.
Your actual answer just queued another question for me. I like to ask this to guys that do this for a living because you have so much insight into these players that guys like me don't. Who's the guy that you love and you're like, NBA teams, why don't you like this guy more? And then who's the guy that you talk to people the NBA teams love and you're like, dude, I just don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, I answered with Rocco Precaution. I will say that like JT Thor is somebody that I've been a huge fan of, who recently had a huge bump when it was discovered that his age was written down wrong for a lot of major draft sites. He's from Nebraska, so like, I mean, there's a stereotype that like some players have birth certificates that are phony because they're born outside the United States. That stuff does happen, but just like there's a general perception. But JT Thor is again from Nebraska, which is an American place, and he was he in every draft and almost every draft site he was written down as I think it's a 2002 birthday, so he's 19 going on 20 in the next month or so. And about 3 weeks ago, somebody reached out to him and to had an interview, and they're like, yeah, so like, what'd you do for your 19th birthday? He's like, 19. I'm 18. Like, I was born in 2003. And they're like, oh, and wouldn't you know it, being a year younger and having the year that he had, where Sharif only played 12 games. I would say their second best player, Justin Powell, played 10. They played exactly 0 games together. And JT Thorpe, young combo forward, not really a creator, so he's relying on from the playmaking of others to set him up. Has 3-point versatility, gets to the rim, very athletic, toolsy, good horizontal ability to move in space defensively. Kind of got a weird deal based on his context. And to me, it's like there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I mean, in a draft where things are sort of flat from 20 to 45, like why wouldn't you gamble at like 22 or 23 or 24 or whatever? On a guy just to have the extra control, have the long-term view on a player who's, again, now 18, was 19, 3 weeks ago, but is now 18. A guy that I would say I struggle with that NBA teams love. That is a tough one because, I mean, this is a class that just doesn't have consensus. So I think that an archetype that I struggle with is like older, like guys who are really good in college, but they were like 22, 23. Not Duarte, like not the shooting type.
How about Davion Mitchell? Would he be in that category?
I think so. I mean, I think that there was a time where like Davion Mitchell was getting like top 10 consideration. I think we're a little bit past that. With Davion Mitchell, you kind of have the 1 year shooting jump, which is always scary. Because usually guys don't get like 15, 20% better from 3 in 1 year.
Unless you're Julius Randle, of course. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in college specifically.
No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
And I mean, let's just hope that Julius stays that way.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And by the way, he might not.
Yeah, he might not. I hope he does because his success was just so enjoyable to watch. But yeah, I mean, the older guys who are on the other side of the age curve. So like you have guys like JT Thor, where it's expected that they'll struggle because they're playing players who are 2, 3, 4, 5 years older. And I mean, at times you get the benefit of optimism where it's like, look, he's 18. He could be anything. He could also be bad, but he could be anything. At 23, you're expected to dominate, and you're expected to dominate by such a level because you're playing people that can be anywhere from 1 to 5 years younger. And I just struggled to really map that curve well unless there's a specific fit that works for them. So like a player like Chris Duarte, if you need a shot versatile wing, and I think Duarte undershot his percentages. I think he's a better shooter than his like almost 40% from 3 because I've seen him shoot better than that before. I can understand, but for guys who don't have a really specific archetype yet, Duarte shot 42%, and I think he's a better shooter than 42%. I can struggle with Davion Mitchell, guys like that, where I don't feel like they dominated versus younger guys, and I have some worry that their archetype won't be matched perfectly, and there will be some backslide.
Do you think Mitchell though? And again, I think it's an interesting point. He seems like a Tibbs guy though. No, like Thibodeau watches him and his effort that he would just kind of fall in love with him.
Yeah, I mean, like I hear that, but I also think that like Tibbs likes scorers.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Mitchell quite fits that. Like, because I mean, like preseason people are like, oh yeah, he's gonna love Frank because Frank's a great defender. And like Frank is, but he doesn't do the things that this roster needs.
Right.
And as much as Tibbs is a stylist and that he does have a clear preference for styles of players, at the end of the day, I think I've never really seen him go against what works, just because he has either an attachment to the 2007 Chicago Bulls or a certain style of the game. Like he's never going to shoot himself in the foot just because he enjoys the way it looks. So I think that, like, while Mitchell is definitely the style of player he likes, I just don't think it's a perfect fit with this roster. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else who's like really jumped out, but for the most part, I really, really like this class. And while it was like, it doesn't have almost any draft and stash guys, because all of the fringe first round Euros bailed. Their deadline was this past week. And almost all the way down, like this is going to be a draft where I think you get a lot of fun second round value, because people are going to have to really dive into the Americans, figure how they feel about fit.
All right, so final question: give me your ideal result for the Knicks here, PD. It can be combining picks to trade up. It could be sitting there and making all the picks. You know what the Knicks' needs are. What do you think would be an ideal result at 1 a.m. on Thursday night when this draft is over?
I mean, I think that if you leave the draft with an advantage creator by hook or by crook, that's, I would say, an essential. If that is Sharif, if that is Jared Butler, then like that's a good draft. That right there, it doesn't matter what you have to do to get there. I think that I would have a higher grade on Sharif for the Knicks specifically, just because of how much defensive cover they're going to have for him. And then like a fun bet in the second round. There's going to be a lot of players available, whether it's a team upset like we talked about, like where it's Joe Wieskamp, where you get an older shooter, whether it's a big strong guy who you just want to have as many of that archetype who can sort of slide between a couple of positions, swing on like a Raekwon Gray or something, or going for one of these freshmen who disappointed but still entered the draft. There's a lot of really, really, really fun options, but an advantage creator who can pass is I think the most important thing.
PD, this was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed your more level-headed, nuanced look at how this goes and the process, which I don't think a lot of people get. You're knee deep in it all the time, to your point. I think it's really valuable for people to hear from somebody that does this the way you do it. So thank you very much for the time. And just one more time, just tell the folks where they can find your social media, the stuff that you're doing, so they can find your great work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just hope that I did right by Spencer Perlman.
You did. Absolutely.
You can find me on Twitter at Above the Break 3. I do a YouTube show called Let's Watch Film, where me and a guest, usually an NBA analyst or a draft analyst, watch a single game by a prospect, cut the film up, show you, their strengths, their weaknesses, the micro skills that they need to learn or the process of mastery, and discuss what their pathways to development look like. I think we have 15 of those up, and we are going to be doing a mega stream of kind of all the guys that we didn't have time to get to on the 27th. It's going to start at 10 a.m. and go until it's done. So probably going to break down like 25 prospects.
Wow.
Yeah, it's going to be a long day. So if anybody wants to do that, we'd definitely be talking some Sharif. Definitely been covered. Jared Butler. There's a lot of ground to cover. And then I also do long form writing on Patreon. The work is always free, but I have quite a few of the. I think I did 10 on this cycle. I did took up a little bit more time doing video work, but there's a link to that in my Twitter bio, and I think those are equally worthwhile experiences. But yeah, that's where you can find me. Thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun. The Knicks are sort of my adopted team now, because I've got just had such a outpouring of support from Knicks fans. And they always seem to give me great opportunities to talk about, roster construction and development.
Why would you do that to yourself of all the teams? I mean,
Okay,
geez.
you act like that's a rough life. I grew up a Warriors fan,
Oh,
and you have no idea how it like Knicks fans. Like, I feel like there is some kinship between Warriors fans and Knicks fans because it's the idea of being extraordinarily passionate about something is going to hurt you.
yeah.
So, like, I mean, like, the Warriors that I grew up with are not these Warriors. I grew up with the Warriors where, like, there would be mysterious clouds of smoke in the rafters, and everybody loved to come play there, but like, we weren't ever any good, and when we were good, it was just because we were fun.
Do you go as far back as like Tim Hardaway, Chris Mullin Warriors?
I do.
Nice.
Those were the teams of, like, I mean, those are like my first memories as a Warriors fan.
Run TMC, right?
Yep. Those are the first time that I learned the Warriors would really hurt you. So I mean, I've always had a kinship. So the idea of being hurt by a basketball team is an enthralling idea to me, not a repulsive one.
Well, in that case, you couldn't have picked a better team.
Again, kinship. You feel it. I feel it. To opposite sides of the country, but same spirit.
PD,
and also same take of prices.
PD, awesome stuff, dude. This is a lot of fun. Don't be a stranger. Let's do it again. I know this is what you do for a living. Enjoy the next few days leading up to it and have some fun, man. And then the process begins all over again, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's already started. It's very much already started. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it, man. I really appreciate your time and your insight. PD Webb again at Above the Break, the number 3 on Twitter. Check it out. And thanks for joining us on this episode of The Bank Shot. Draft's coming fast and furious, folks. We'll see you next time.